and I've been doing franchise development, helping companies become franchise systems for 25 years. I'm originally from the Chicago area where I worked for a franchise firm there for the first 8 years. And then in 2009 started FMS, which is our current franchise development firm. And we do a lot of the same things that I was doing before, packaging franchise models, getting the documentation in place and ready. We now also sell franchises. That's our unique differentiator. But I've worked with some now big brands from the beginning. Jimmy John's, Auntie Anne's, European Wax Center, Anytime Fitness, Two Men in a Truck. We franchised a model for Costco. Almost every industry segment we've touched on in some way, shape, or form over the years. But great to meet everyone.
Yeah, this is fantastic. So, I mean, you've really done it all. So excited to have you on the call today to give everybody some insider tips and tricks. So everybody on the call, while you're having questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll carve out some time at the end after Chris's presentation to kind of go through them, but feel free to put them in the chat as they come to you so you don't lose them. Excellent. Good stuff. Well, Chris, why don't you take it away?
Thank you, Anna Marie. If could you let me share my screen and then I can
Yes, absolutely.
in here too.
Okay, perfect. You should be good to go.
Okay. All right. So we will keep I'll call this a workshop. We'll keep this workshop as little about FMS as possible and as much about the process of franchising, some of the decisions that you as the business owner would need to make, and some of the things you need to consider if you did take the franchise route. As Anna Marie said, I'm always available to go through questions and would love to talk to you about anything that has to do with franchising. So, absolutely, one point to put out here is just know that I'm an available resource for you and would be happy to help you in looking at this franchise model, and the whole dynamic of it. So, number one, we'll touch briefly on who we are. I'll do it really quick. Number two, or B, I will talk about ways to raise capital to grow the business. I think that goes in line with Honeycomb and the whole connection here. That's always one of the biggest obstacles we have in building a brand and expanding a model. Definitely, we'll address that. Then we'll look at why franchising, how the process of franchising works, and then the actual franchise expansion process if you did take these steps, and then what the next steps would look like if you in fact decided to roll out a franchise model. So we have a total of 38 people on our team. We're based in Atlanta, Georgia. We cover two main things. One is development, which on this list here is strategic planning, legal, operations, marketing. And then two would be franchise sales, which is the actual implementation and execution of a franchise model, where we will take it to market with a brand. We'll run the sales with them, and we'll do the screening, the qualifying, we'll find the leads, and then we'll take them all the way to close. We've worked with some big brands that I mentioned, but a lot of brands that you probably have not heard of, like Flower Tent. We started them with one, and they have 138 of these regional tents. Restoration One, we started with one. They're in the water, fire, mold remediation business. They have 420. Matco Tools is a big name. The Weave Shop is a salon model that we started with one, and they have 68 they sold. Baxter Healthcare is a big one. So all ranges and industry segments and types and shapes and sizes. So number one, let's talk about how ways that we can raise capital to grow our business. And this is usually one of the biggest obstacles that we as an entrepreneur have to overcome, is how do we infuse capital into our brand so that we can effectively scale it? The first option would be bootstrapping it, taking the profits from year one, rolling it into a piggy bank for year two, and continuing to save, taking those profits from each year, and then investing in company-owned growth and investing in all the expenses it takes to open up the unit, fund it, staff it, and all those pieces. The first issue with organic growth is that it tends to be slow. It can take a long time to get any real growth. And usually the money that we've allocated to expansion and to opening up new locations, it tends to get soaked up by the day-to-day operations, just the way it kind of works. The other bigger issue that I have with company-owned growth, if you all have not read the book The E-Myth by Michael Gerber, I always recommend it. Simple, easy read for all of us entrepreneurs with ADD. And the point of it is that if you cannot build a business if you're stuck in it. And sounds great on paper. I know it's easier, it's harder to make it actually happen. But we as entrepreneurs many times become our number one employee. And we end up doing an endless array of jobs, probably because it's our own fault and we won't let other people take it over. But whatever the reason is, it's impossible for us to scale the business if we're too deeply stuck into the day-to-day operations. And I find that with company-owned growth, we get to opening up 2 or 3 or 4, whatever that number is, and then we end up finding that we are just not equipped to scale into new markets. We have to close one of the units or 2 of the units. It's hard to get out of it. That's my biggest issue with company-owned growth. The next option would be debt-funded growth, where we go get a loan and we use that capital to open up more locations. Difficulty here that you really need to plan for and make sure you have the financial model in place is that debt comes with a payback structure and a cost of the money. Typically, new locations do not break even right away. You have to give them some time before they will start to produce cash flow. So we need to make sure we're aware of getting into debt-funded growth before we factor in the cost of the capital. The third option to raise capital is equity-funded growth. And getting partnerships and into partnerships, traditional partnerships, comes with all sorts of complications. When you let someone into the business and you give them equity and they have an ability to have control over the business, you now have another partner in that business who's telling you how to run your business, which sometimes can work great. And I've had a couple of partnerships that work great. I've had others that didn't. The key there will be making sure there's a very clear, concise structure, making sure that all parties spend the time to do the due diligence and have a clear understanding of who will be doing what, how the money will work, and what are the expectations out of each party involved. The fourth option to raise capital, which most probably wouldn't even consider it as an option, is franchising. Now, I use the word franchising. We could also use that to grab licensing or dealerships or business opportunities. And we'll talk a little bit about what the differences are between each one of those. But the idea of any one of those channels is that we are creating a vehicle to allow a third party to invest into our company, both directly by paying us a franchise fee when they buy the rights to open up a location, and indirectly. And what I mean by that is if you buy a McDonald's franchise, your fee that you pay McDonald's is about $50,000. The investment to open up the restaurant is anywhere from 1.8 to $3 million to open up that McDonald's location. If you as a franchisee buy that location, you are making that 1.8 to $3 million investment. If McDonald's open up a company location, they would make that investment. Even though those dollars don't flow directly to McDonald's, indirectly, you're making an investment in that company. The beauty of the franchise model is that the franchisor, the company offering the franchise system, retains all the equity and all the control. So the franchisee, in order to keep their rights, has to follow your system. They have to use the brand the way we want them to. They have to have the product quality, the service consistency, whatever it is that we're providing to customers, they have to maintain that, or you can cut the franchise. They lose their investment. They can't be in the business for, usually it's 2 to 5 years. It's a big loss on their part. So they have every incentive to follow this model exactly the way you tell them to. The other reason there's incentive is it's their business. They put money in this business. So now we as franchisors or as owners of the brand, we have the second major benefit of franchising, which is we get a vested owner operator run and operate this location. No one cares about a business more than the owner who put money in the business and has skin in the game. And that's the idea. We want vested owner operators running these locations who are driving them, who are pushing them, who are maximizing profitability, doing everything they can to make sure the customer is getting the best possible experience they can. So in today's market where it can be tough to find and keep good people, franchising absolutely is a way to address that and help us with our growth from a human capital standpoint. The third big reason for franchising would be the ability to scale quickly. We've had many franchise systems that have, at the peak of their growth, been able to open up over 100 units a year. Jimmy John's at their peak was doing almost 200 restaurants a year. It would be very difficult to find another vehicle that you could be able to scale as quickly as you can with a franchise model. And along those same lines, long term, as the company grows, franchising is definitely a way to develop an exit strategy. And most of us as entrepreneurs, I know I didn't. We don't necessarily think about exit strategy all the time. It's absolutely something we should think about and should be aware of. At some point, whether or not you choose to sell the business or pass it on to your kids or find the next chapter, if you have not thought about exit strategy, the results aren't great. And what I mean by that is if you run and operate your own business and you're doing most of the jobs in the business, you're very much an owner operator. The business probably is worth somewhere between 1 and 3 times your net income for a year. So what I mean there is if we're netting $100,000 a year and we go to sell the business, it's worth $100,000 to $300,000. And I know from what I do and how much blood, sweat, and tears I put into this over the years, the number doesn't sound that exciting. And it's like I've put so much into this, and for that to be the end game is like, ugh. In the franchise model, that ratio goes up to 15, up to, we had one brand sell for 34 times earnings, insulation franchise. So that same $100,000, the average is probably about 18 times, maybe 20. That same $100,000 times 20 times is a $2 million valuation, times 18 is a $1.8 million valuation. The reason you get that difference is when you franchise, you are effectively proving that it's not just you that makes this model work. That it's not just a one-off and there's a successful entrepreneur, there's a skilled entrepreneur. It's a system, it's a process, and we've effectively been able to teach it to other people. Now the business takes on transferability, it has exit value, and it's absolutely attractive to a buyer. There's been a lot of private equity and venture capital firms that have bought in the franchise space. We've had probably 12 brands since COVID that had exits to private equity firms. So whether it's a larger sale in those cases or even a smaller sale, we want that higher multiplier. That's how we get to a reasonable number for our exit. So legally, what makes a franchise model is name, system, fee. That's what legally qualifies something as a franchise. So if they use our brand, they use our likeness, they present with our color scheme, our look, our feel, our location design, that's what qualifies the name. The system is when we tell them to use this vendor. You have to buy your equipment from this one. You have to advertise this way. We want you to run the day-to-day business using these systems, these techniques. That qualifies as a system. And then the fee is a payment of a fee upfront for the rights to use the name in the system. Technically, a license model is when they only buy the rights to use the name. So what would trigger the move from a license, whether you did it advertently or inadvertently, would be as soon as you give them the name, they pay a fee, and then you train them. That's what flips it into a franchise model. A business opportunity is if we only offer them the use of the name, the system. They use their own name. So I have my own recipe for making a certain product. I sell it to a buyer. They open up as Bob's Hamburgers, and they pay me a fee for that. Once you incorporate the name and the system, it needs to be a franchise model. We've done versions of all of these. My advice typically, though, is to end up back with a franchise model. It's definitely the most comprehensive. It gives you the most control, and there's the least amount of risk with it from your standpoint, because it's the most buttoned up version of these, and we can certainly talk about any and all of those if you'd like. At the federal level, there's no active registration or approval of franchises. The Federal Trade Commission oversees this. I knock on wood, I've never interacted with the Federal Trade Commission in 25 years of doing this. The only time that you would is if something incredibly bad happened. I can't imagine what it would even be, but the only way the Federal Trade Commission gets involved is they set the precedence and the standard of what you need to have to be a franchise model. And the main thing is a franchise disclosure document and a franchise agreement. And we'll talk about what goes into those things. In the disclosure document, you have to give this to a buyer at least 14 days before they decide to invest. It's called a cooling off period, and it gives them a chance to get to know you, get to know the model, really research it, hire a franchise attorney to get to know the thing. In this agreement, we can hold them to a strict operating standard and say you have to run the business exactly to my specifications. That could be things as detailed as we want you to maintain a 4.75 Google review rating, and we want you to say this line every time a customer walks in the door, to things not so specific, like you need to buy a vehicle for your business, and it can be a Chevy or a Ford, and needs to have less than 50,000 miles, needs to be this color, whatever the specifications are. But this agreement allows us to standardize that and then hold people accountable to it. In here, we would also require that they follow a specific branding, look, feel, presentation, everything about our brand. We can require them to follow it exactly to a T. Also, in the disclosure document, we have to give them financial statements. There's two sets of financial statements in the franchise documents. The one that's required is the one that we would do. We would set up a new company for you, a new franchise company, and it's going to be separate from your main business. That is the company that's selling the franchise rights. That's the company that needs to have audited financials. The next question might be, well, this is a new company. What the heck's in there? There's nothing in there. And the answer is you're right. But the way the law is written, you need to disclose those numbers so that the buyer understands the health of the company that they're actually signing on with. The other set of financials is optional, and that is where you would show them a profit and loss statement of your corporate location. So if we're in the restaurant business, we would give them a P&L of one of our restaurants or all of our restaurants if we have multiples. If we're in the janitorial business, we would show them our profit and loss statement of what our corporate business did last year. Those are the numbers that are more meaningful to a buyer. Those are what they actually would like to see, and what the buyer actually needs to make a buying decision. We do not legally have to do that. I strongly recommend it, because how else are you going to get someone to invest in a new franchise model if we're not showing them some of the financials that we've done and what we've achieved? We're very clear in this presentation that we're not guaranteeing they will have the same results. We're giving them our historical data so they can use it as part of their planning process. That's the line, and that's the messaging. I mentioned there's no approval on the federal level. There is approval on the state level, and it depends on the state. The light gray states, light blue states, do not have any filing at all. So once we have a disclosure document in place, we can sell a franchise in every one of these states without any additional approval. The light green states are what they call filing states, and they're pretty easy to work with. Florida, for example, is a $100 filing fee. It takes 2 weeks to get approved. Texas is $25, takes maybe 2 or 3 weeks. Utah is $100. Nebraska is $100. They do have individual fees that we have to pay them. They don't take very long to get approved, and they will not review anything about the franchise. It's a matter of sending in a fee and an application. Very quick and easy. The green states are tougher. And really, out of these green states, the only ones that to be aware of are California, Washington, Minnesota, Illinois, Virginia, Maryland, New York. All of the other ones are pretty easy to work through. Those 7, though, tend to be the most heavily regulated. They will review the FDD. They will review the franchise documents. They'll want audited financials year one. And they will go through a pretty strict regulatory process to sign off before they will approve a franchise model there. But regardless, my point in showing this is that we need to make sure we're aware of these states. I don't recommend that we file in them until we have a buyer. Wait till someone's engaged, then we go through the approval process. And overall, they're relatively simple. It's just a matter of making sure we do it before we collect a franchise fee and sell a deal. So what are the big picture benefits? Number one, franchising allows us to build a brand quickly. In the franchise agreement, we require the franchisee to spend a certain amount of money locally in their market every month. You won't see this money, but at the end of the month, you will audit to make sure they did it. We want you to spend $1,000 on Facebook pay-per-click. We want you to put out $1,000 of yard signs. We want you to do a $1,000 billboard in your market. Whatever those requirements are, we can hold them to it and require them to do it as part of their model. At the next level of advertising, we have a regional co-op requirement. And this is where franchisees in a given market, say Pittsburgh, say Orlando, whatever it might be, you guys have to pool funds in that market, and you're going to do a TV commercial that will benefit all of you in that region. That is money, again, that will not come to you. It will go directly to the advertisers, but you'll be able to audit that and check it to see that they did it, and you'll be able to facilitate it as well. The last level of advertising is a national brand fund. And this is an advertising fund that they contribute to that is paid to you. Usually it's like a percentage of sales, like 1 or 2%, and you take that money and you reinvest it to promote all the business, promote the brand. Many times this is where I've seen like celebrity or sports star endorsements, is it will come out of this marketing fund. And the idea is it helps everyone. The high tide raises all ships because they're part of the franchise network. Franchises do have a higher rate of success. As a result, franchisees are able to get loans more easily. There's a thing called the SBA Franchise Directory that we will get a brand approved on. And once a brand is on this, it's easier for someone to go get an SBA loan to buy a business in that franchise system. But generally speaking, 87% is the number that you see quoted by SBA of franchises succeeding. Compare that to new businesses succeeding in the US, it's like 6%. So literally completely inverse. And the reason it's inverse is because they've got a franchisor behind them, helping them choose the right location, helping them with their marketing, helping them with their hiring, their staffing, their operations. All those things would be supported by the franchisor. 5, I mentioned speed of growth through scalability. And 6, I mentioned the exit strategy. All definitely big positives to this model. So let's talk a little bit about how we make money as a franchisor. The first is the franchise fee. This again is when the buyer decides to make an investment and buy a location. They pay a fee of $15,000 to $50,000. That fee is not for anything tangible. I mentioned McDonald's. It's a $50,000 fee, but it's a $2 million investment in the business. The same would be the case for any brand. You pay that fee just to get the rights to the name and the rights to the system, and then you make the investment in the business beyond that. As the franchisor, you could require them to buy things through you. Maybe we have a specialty product. Maybe we have a construction background or a construction arm, and we want to do the construction for new locations. All those things could be additional revenue streams for you as the franchisor, and we can require the franchisee to buy through you. And that's absolutely could be part of it. After the franchisee opens, they then pay a percentage of the revenue back. This is of top line, 4 to 12%. I've had a couple that went as high as like 15, 20%, where they were actually doing services, providing services like Liberty Tax. Their royalty fee is up to 20%, but they do the tax returns for them. But the key here is that percentage is on top line gross sales. So we're getting paid as the franchisor, whether the franchisee is making money or not. Obviously, we want the franchisee to make money, but that's the structure of royalties, because we don't want to get into too much accounting of you can figure out how to show a profit or not as a business owner, and the franchisee should be doing that. But we want the royalty revenue tied to top line, which is much easier to track. Advertising fees, I mentioned the brand fund, that would be in addition to the royalty fee. And then I mentioned product supply markups. As the franchisor, we might use this platform as a way to develop a distribution channel, and definitely it can be an effective way to do that. This is a very high level example, and I'll describe the reason, the point of this slide. But let's assume we do $500,000 a year as a business. That's our unit level sales volume. Let's assume we charge a 5% royalty on those gross sales, and let's assume that we charge a $30,000 franchise fee. Now, let's assume that we sell 5 franchises per year over 5 years for a total of 25 units. That would be a total of 750,000. That's the 25. Oh, shoot. That's the 25 times 30,000. And then the 5% on 500,000 in gross sales means that after 5 years, we are generating almost $2 million a year in royalty fees. My point in putting this up is that the way you make money in this business is not by convincing people to buy just to get them to buy. It's by bringing in people that bring the skill set, the capital, and the wherewithal to make this thing work. The big opportunity and the big upside is by creating mutually beneficial relationships with franchisees that come in the system and stick for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. That's where this turns into an unbelievable financial model because we're getting that repeatable, residual kind of membership-based revenue. And as the franchisor, you're basically being paid. It's kind of like a software fee it is a royalty fee. And you're not necessarily having to run the business anymore. You're being paid just to coach, teach, and mentor. It's a much more leveraged and scaled and kind of next level way to run the business and to approach the business. And again, in the end, turns out to create an exit strategy. So let's talk a little bit about what makes a business franchisable and some of the things to consider. I intentionally used the word average when I said average business model. I don't know that a ton of people know this, but the average Subway franchisee, their net income averages about $30,000 a year. Now, they have 42,000 franchises. So the reason I bring that up is it's not only the numbers that make these things go. Yes, the numbers help. The more profitable we are, the better our financial presentation is. Absolutely, that helps. But it's not the only thing that drives this. We need to have a model that we can show profitability and that we can help people see how they can get a return on their investment. But I wouldn't rule yourself out of doing this if you're not doing some incredibly high financial model. It's still worth looking at it. Number two, let's make sure we have a national market. Whatever it is that we're selling, the broader the consumer appeal, the easier it is to franchise the model. If it's very niche and specialized, it can be tough just because we need to ultimately have consumer demand to justify the franchise sale. We do need to have a profitable prototype, something that we could show a franchisee to say, look, here's the model. Come out, try the food, see the operation, go out in the field, whatever it is that we're selling. That has to be in place in order for us to be able to pitch this and present it. We need to make sure that we have systems that are transferable, that we can teach and train this. Probably the best indicator of that is, have you hired people? Do you have a staff? Do you have team members that you've been able to effectively train and teach? That's a starting point. I will also look at the technology. What tech are we using in our systems now and in our business? The more tech, the more operating technology we have, usually the easier it is to teach and the easier it is to show a new owner how to pick this up and run with it. Next, let's talk about return on investment because this would be one of the other qualifiers. And this is a high level slide. So I'm again happy to talk with anyone who would like to go through this in a more detailed discussion. But generally speaking, for a business model that requires an upfront construction, like a restaurant, a retail model, it has a brick and mortar component to it. We need to show that buyer how they can get their money back in somewhere between 5 to 7 years. So what I mean is, if the total investment is $500,000 to open up a location, I would look at the cash required to do this. With an SBA loan, we can get them the money they need with $100,000 down. So we used $100,000 as our upfront cash investment. That means we need to show them at least $20,000 per year to hit that 5-year benchmark of a 5-year return on investment. Now, you'd have to also factor in the cost of debt, and you have to factor in the cost of a manager to run that location. What I don't want to do is cloud the income for them as a owner-operator with the income that comes from the business, the profit that comes from the business. So we would actually plug in a manager's salary into that and make sure that we still hit those thresholds. Again, happy to talk to you about that if you want to go through particulars on that and walk through your financial model as well. So our process that we go through, we start first with consultation, and this is open to anyone. I mentioned earlier, would love to speak with you. We're happy to talk with you about the business and the financials and just answer questions. There's no obligation for that. We are always very, very open to that and love to speak to entrepreneurs about it. So that would be step one. Then, if we collectively felt that there was an opportunity here and decided to engage, we would go through an analysis process where we would pull all of the competing franchise companies' franchise documents and get a look to see where have they done well, where have they missed, what's gone right, wrong, how would we compare to those, and how we stack up against them, to make sure that we have a legitimate path for taking this model to market as a franchise system. Then we go through a feasibility study, we map out the plans, and then the legal documentation is that franchise disclosure document and the franchise agreement. There's a franchise law firm that we work with that would be part of this. We then create all the operations documentation that we need to teach and train a new owner how to run a location. And then we go into implementation, which is where, if you wanted to, we could be your sales team. So we actually run the sales and we'll go out to market and actually pitch this and present it. You don't have to have us do that. You can sell on your own. You can have other companies sell as well. In the strategic planning process, just to get a little more granular, researching competition, defining the franchise model. We'll figure out the fees, like the franchise fees and the royalties and all the numbers that we need to be able to go to market and make sure this is a win-win, both for you and for the franchise buyer. I mentioned earlier, but we need to make sure this is a win-win, mutually beneficial relationship. If franchisees make money, they refer other franchisees to come into the system. They also buy more franchises. It creates this really residual snowball effect to it. And so the key here is to make sure that people can look back on their investment with us and say, that was a great move. I would do it again, all those things. I mentioned the disclosure document, what goes into this. If anyone's interested, we can send samples of these things. You can take a look at them, but they are 150-page sort of contracts that go into everything on the franchise model, all the nuances of what you do, training that we'll offer them, the investment range, the territory model, everything that goes into building a franchise structure and that they need to be aware of before they invest would be in here. I mentioned the item 19 as well. That's where we would show those financial projections or historical financial results that they could use to create their own projections. The third part of this is all the operations documentation. This is where we write those training manuals and materials. It always gets stuck on that phase here. So, and the key here is to put everything that we know down on paper and organized in a format that we can give to someone. Because the average franchise buyer comes into the business with not that much experience in our industry. That's part of why they're buying, because they want our help, they want our coaching, they want our support. And the idea with a franchise model and the pitch to a franchise buyer is, we can't guarantee success. It's up to you to work the business. You've got to show up. You've got to run this thing. What we will do for you is help you skip your first 2-3 years of learning curve. If you went out and did this on your own, you might make it. You might be successful, but it's going to take you a long time to figure out what I have learned in all the years I've been doing this and all the good and bad. And I figured out what, not only what to do, but what not to do. And all you have to do is, join us for a franchise model. And, then all of a sudden it starts to shed light on the idea of, hey, it makes sense for me to pay $35,000 or $40,000 to do this, to avoid potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars of mistakes that I might make otherwise. The next and kind of the last big piece here is, you all are entrepreneurs, and I think it's hard sometimes to understand, why in the heck would anyone buy a franchise? Wouldn't you just go do it on your own? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. And as an entrepreneur, we have a willingness to take on risk that the average person doesn't have. And I'm sure you've all figured that out now at some point in your life, that the average person's not okay with that level of risk that we take in most cases every day. And that's unique. It's not typical of most people. A franchisee is like an entrepreneur, but they're not a full-blown entrepreneur. If they were, they wouldn't be talking to us. They are people who see the value in having someone coach them and having someone give them a blueprint and a roadmap and say, here's the best plan of action. Here's the vendors you should use. Here's how you should go to market. Those are the people that end up investing in franchises. They have a little bit of trepidation around jumping into something. They like to see a plan. There is a huge market for this category of buyer. And if anyone would like to, I'll send you free passes to all the franchise shows. We do 40 of them a year. These are places where you can see it in person, people coming to a room full of franchisors and saying, I don't know what I want to do. Can you tell me how janitorial works? Can you tell me how a print shop would work? And they're interviewing franchisors, trying to figure out the best path for them to go to market and to invest in a business. Most of our leads come off the internet. We buy a lot of leads. We do a lot of search engine optimization, pay per click, that kind of stuff. But trade shows are a great way to see it in person. My point here is that there is a huge market of people that are out there trying to get into business for themselves that need the support of a franchise system. That's who we're presenting to. That's who we're playing to. And the more we can box up what we do and show them, here's the system. We have it all figured out. We have a great model for you. It takes a ton of the risk out of it for you. It makes it easier for us to convert and to convince people to join us. So that wraps up the workshop part of it. Any questions I can help go through on any part of this?
Yeah, I think to start, I would love to hear from your perspective, Chris, and thank you so much for that thorough workshop. Super, super great content there. I'm curious to hear from your perspective because you've met with so many entrepreneurs. Like, what is the biggest mistake that you see entrepreneurs that are considering franchising their business make?
I think mistake number one is that entrepreneurs don't consider it and
Hmm.
don't maybe think that they're ready or I think it's easy to look out and see like big franchise brands and assume it's like, well, I'm
Yeah.
not there. That's not me. They all started out in the exact same spot. And
Hmm.
uh, I mean, Jimmy John's, I started working with him when he had 7 restaurant locations. European Wax Center that has 1,400 now, and we worked with them with one waxing studio.
Wow.
So they all started out in the same spot. I would never overlook this as a possibility. The next level of mistakes, though, I do think franchisors, if you did go this route, I do think franchisors can underestimate the amount of time, energy, and effort that it takes to work with new franchisees and to support them, to train them, to help them get up and running. It's a lot. And the way that I would approach this model, the way that I recommend with companies that I'm working with, is I would treat each new franchise location as if it were a company-owned location. I would look at it the exact same way. The difference is the franchisee is paying for it. It's not your money. Um, and the other big difference is that if we have chosen the right person, we've gone through the right steps with them, they should wean off this. It should be like a 90, 120 day kind of time frame
Yeah.
when they start to become self-sufficient. But you as the franchisor have to go all in on these locations, particularly for the first 2 or 3, and then you will get better at learning how to delegate. But you need to plan on a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of commitment there. Um, you cannot overestimate the need for good systems. And again, these are some of the areas where we could come in and help. But even if it's things you wanted to work on leading up to it,
Yeah.
uh, you need to have great tech in place, good operating POS, good
Hmm.
CRM, good. The other thing is make sure your brand is tight.
Hmm.
Uh, I can't tell you how many business owners I'll connect with. They've got a great model. We'll look at it. It's like, well, check out the website. My son built it on GoDaddy. And it's like, we're not going to be able to convince someone to invest in a franchise if we don't have really top
Like a
end
sleek
polished.
brand.
Yeah. So those would be big things.
That's really helpful. And I'm seeing some other questions in the chat. Two questions on like business registration. So one of them being, does being registered as an LLC or an S corp work?
Either one is fine. But we would set up a new company though to franchise with. So however you have your entity set up now, I don't want to say it's irrelevant, but it's kind of
Hmm.
irrelevant because we would set up a new company for you. We usually recommend that you file that company in Delaware, Wyoming, or Nevada. Tends to be 3 of the best ones. Nevada has a minimum tax now, so I probably would lean towards Wyoming or Delaware.
Okay,
But we need a new entity regardless. And
got it. That makes sense. And are there any restrictions any around any of the types of entities that a franchise must use?
No, I'd say most that we go to market with are an LLC to start,
Okay.
but you could incorporate if you have an intention to sell shares
Hmm.
or bring on investors in your company into your franchise company in the near future. I'd probably recommend an S corp or incorporating. Um, but most of the brands that we work with start out as an LLC, and then they could flip it into a corporation later on too.
Excellent. I have another question here on what's the timeline if someone were to start working with FMS?
Normally, it's about 4 months from the
Okay.
time that we decide to do it, let's go, to when we're actually selling and marketing and beginning to recruit. Um, the only asterisk there would be if we're located in a state like California, Illinois, Maryland, Virginia, New York, Minnesota, Washington. Now, we can set the franchise company up outside of those states, but a lot of times some of our early buyers will come in the state. So I would probably add another 2 months on to get approved in those one of those seven.
Okay.
But still within four, you could sell outside of that state even. Um, as long as we set the franchise company up outside of the state too, then we could do that.
Excellent. Excellent. And then Chris, we have another question in the chat. This is a good one. As far as franchising models, if you were to look at, a food truck franchising model or a storefront franchising model, which would you say is more appealing?
You know, I don't know. It's hard to say one's better than the other. Um, we've had a lot of really great mobile models, particularly since COVID. So I think we're seeing a movement towards that where people
Hmm.
have to sign on a commercial lease. They're not stuck in one location. So I think there's a great opportunity there. But if I look at sheer volume of number of units that we sell, we sell like 30 to 60 of these a month. Um, the majority are still brick and mortar, which
Interesting.
seems kind of amazing sometimes because the cost of construction is so high right now in
Yeah.
good location. But I think a lot of people come into the franchise model thinking that way, and they're already thinking brick and mortar, setting up a space like that. So I think both have opportunity. I would definitely steer away from full service if we're in food service, without question.
Interesting.
That's
Oh,
hard to sell.
yeah.
Uh, then you kind of need someone who does bring that food service background into the space, but QSR, quick serve, simple retail models, brick and mortar, huge market for it, and we've got a bunch that we've done that have done really well, and they're still selling brick and mortar.
I love that. And for anyone here on the call, we also have a custom discount with a trusted food trailer, food truck manufacturer. I'll be sure to put it in the chat again that you can check out. He's alongside Chris on the preferred vendors list. So if anyone is thinking about food truck, food trailer, be sure to check that out as you're exploring, your different options. We have another question here. Does selling wholesale products in stores, does that affect a franchise potentially?
It could, yeah. We could get into channel conflict there.
Hmm.
So my recommendation, if you did a franchise model, would be to come up with some sort of a revenue share. You can limit it pretty extensively where it wouldn't get out of control, but where you would say, hey, if we're going to sell, like e-commerce is a great example of this. We franchised a brand called Medifast weight loss, and it became a huge issue that they were selling online and not sharing any of the revenue or profits with franchisees, and the franchisee would get a customer at the retail unit, and they'd go back and buy online, and none of the revenue was attributed to the franchisee.
Got it.
You can alleviate that a lot by even offering a small commission share and say, hey, this is another channel we're doing. We're selling through third-party retailers. We're doing e-commerce. We're going to give you a commission if it lands with a customer that's in any of your territory. Hey, problem solved. The franchisee now feels like we're on the same team,
Yeah.
uh, and we're not necessarily fighting against them. And in the end, it's probably, as long as you do it the right way, it's probably not a large amount of significant amount of revenue that you're sharing, but it'll alleviate the whole fight.
Makes a ton of sense. Makes a ton of sense. Um, does FMS work with with the franchisor to maybe help them establish the manual? Do they provide attorneys for setup documents potentially?
Yeah, we do. We actually write the manual. So we have an in-house team that would come on site and do that and write all the training and operations documents. And then we get it loaded onto a training software called Trainual so that franchisees have access to that content and what Trainual does is it tests the franchisee to make sure they read it. And then they have to answer the questions before they go to the next section type thing. But we do that in-house. We do work with outside attorneys to do the franchise agreements and the legal documents, but not necessarily on the manuals as much. Um, they do have to be involved in that, but it's pretty limited. Most of what we're writing is coming from operations and more procedural people.
Love that. And what is the cost for turnkey franchising from start to finish?
If we do everything for a brand, which includes the franchise attorney, then we charge a one-time fee of 36,000. We're always flexible on how we're paid that. So we normally would like break it up over 6 months at the
Mhm.
least. But we'll even do other things than that too. So but that includes everything, our travel, setting up the new company, trademarking. We need to get a federal trademark in place, which we've got a law firm that we work with there too, and then the disclosure documents and agreements. And then, as I mentioned before, we will then help sell too if you wanted help getting franchisees in.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. What would you say, like you alluded to this a little bit earlier, I asked you about mistakes that franchisees make or people that are looking to franchise make. And you said, make sure to have a really good website, have a good CRM. What would you say are some things to know that you're doing really well and you should go into franchise? Like, what would be the signs that a business owner that's kind of on the fence could look to and say, okay, I actually am ready to franchise?
Great question. The first thing I would say is the numbers. I mean, if we're growing and we're seeing an upward trajectory in financials, then we should be considering expansion vehicles, and I would recommend this be one of them. Um, the other would be number two would be if people are asking. And if you
Hmm.
have people coming to you saying, "Hey, can I invest? Can you help me open up a location? Can you teach me what you know?" Or maybe they're outright saying, "Hey, I want to invest in a franchise. Would you sell me one?"
Yeah.
Um, all of those are great indicators that you should be looking at this thing. And to me, that's probably the best driver is when people start asking, because it's like, what does some guy like me have to say that means anything compared to the potential buyer saying, "I want it."
Yeah.
Um, so I think that's a great sign. I think as soon as you start trying to look at ways to grow into new markets, though, this should be on your radar. And maybe it's like consumers are asking you, "Hey, you need to open up one of these over in my town or my market, or could you ship products?" Those are all great indicators that you should be looking at this as a potential platform and a way to scale. I'd say.
Very cool. We have two more questions here as well. So first question is if FMS sells franchise, if you're helping them sell the franchise, what's the commission for selling?
Normally, we do a couple of different levels. We do a 25% commission if it's someone that we brought in, like met at a trade show, whatever it might be. Normally, the franchise fee is about 40, so our commission's 10, if
Mhm.
that's the case. If it's someone that the client refers to us, "Hey, I've got this customer, they're excited, they want to do this," and they refer it to us to close it, we drop it to 15%. And then if we're not involved in the sale at all, which we'll still help do paperwork and stuff like that, we don't charge anything. So it's totally performance based. So we don't get any royalties. There's no
Hmm.
individual, none of that.
That's great. Very helpful. And then this is a really a good question, the next question here, because I think a lot of business owners are probably thinking the same thing. So like franchise handholding, after the sale. Does FMS provide help or does this fall on the franchisor?
Yeah, we definitely do. We are getting involved in the way I would position us is kind of like your franchise department.
Hmm.
If you went out and hired people to do what we do, we're like a outsourced version of that. Um, we definitely will help make recommendations on training support. Many times we'll get involved in conflict resolution because the buyer knows us, so we'll help navigate that and work through that. We also have a training and support team. If at some point you wanted to look at actually bringing us on to help with actually implementing the training, we could. I don't recommend it up front because I think having you as the business owner involved in that, it gives us the most ability to evolve the training and the support and the system. But if you're absolutely set against, doing that, we have people that can do it who have been ops and training people for a long time. So it definitely could.
Very helpful. Very helpful. And is there a retainer fee for sales service after the sell?
No, we're just a commission. So totally totally based on just the sale itself. And that part of the relationship can go on for years. We've got a
Mm,
pet franchise that we set up in 2010 who we're still selling for 15 years later.
wow.
Most I'd say are like a year to 3 years, but
Mhm.
but we'll work with you as long as it makes sense to have us.
Very cool. Well, Chris, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. For everyone in this chat, remember to check out FMS Franchise through the preferred vendor list. You'll get an exclusive discount specific to Honeycomb subscribers. Really excited to have you on here. It was super helpful. I learned a ton. I hope everyone else did here. We will be sending a recording later on.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.